So let's remind everybody of what happened. So here's some footage from earlier on this year, back in April. This chappie right here, who's a bit blurry in this video. Oh god, it'll do the audio, won't it? Right. Play. There we go. There he is. This dead-eyed young man. Oh god. Right here, that's Carmelo Anthony. He is a suspected, alleged murderer who is currently being investigated. He is going to be on trial soon enough. The reminder for everybody what happened earlier on this year in Texas. There was a sports event going on one day where two schools were participating in the event. I believe it was a running event or track event, something along those lines. Austin Metcalf and his brother were members of one school. Carmelo Anthony was a member of the other school. Carmelo Anthony came over to sit under the other school's tent. Austin Metcalf approached him and said, "You shouldn't be here, can you please leave?" At which point Carmelo Anthony began acting suspicious, backing up, reaching for his bag and saying, "Come at me and see what happens." This was all part of the affidavits and the police report, which you could find online, available to the public when this incident first happened. Upon being provoked, Austin Metcalf did reach for him, at which point Carmelo Anthony pulled out a knife and stabbed Austin Metcalf to death right then and there. Pretty horrifying incident. He was then arrested, and a number of other things came out. The most famous thing that happened at the time was Austin Metcalf's dad came out into the public and said that this was not anything to do with race. Don't make it about race. Pay no attention to the fact that this is just another case of unprovoked violence of black versus white, which only ever tends to go in one direction, whereas the media narratives would have you believe the other way. It came across very strange that that was immediately where he would go to in an interview when he wasn't prompted to, which got a lot of people thinking and looking into why that might be the case, because there is government involvement in these situations. And that's when we did a segment that Roaring Nationalist did on this called Government Enforced Anti-White Racism, which has been expanded upon slightly with a recent video from the Academic Agent called "Did a Secret Agency Really Control the Civil Rights Revolution?" And what this is in regards to is a government agency for the United States. I think they're called the Civil Relations, I've forgotten what they're called all of a sudden, apologies folks, but there is under the Johnson administration, there was a department of the government opened that operates in relative secrecy, that is dedicated to maintaining community relations and racial relations within the United States. And what this means is that whenever there is a racially aggravated crime committed that could look bad in the media, they are the ones who end up going out. We don't know if they declare which department that they are from, but they basically say, "We're from the government," and they hand you a script or bullet points on what you have to say to ensure that nothing inflames community tensions. I'd recommend watching both of these videos.
Why does no one ever say no to them after all the cases then?
I would assume fear. Fear of the fact that... well, two things.
Why does no one ever mention it either?
One, people's bias, which is to not want to rock the boat. So they worry that violence could beget more violence, and they're told by the government, somebody comes to you from the government saying, if you inflame this further, we could see more violence. People don't want that on their conscience. And secondly, somebody comes to you from saying, we're from the government, do this. There's a natural assumption that consequences will follow if you don't. So I think it's fear and people's natural predisposition to not want to rock the boat in a situation like this, especially when you're already going through a tragedy of having lost your son.
Yeah, I suppose they must deal with people who if it was like me, I wouldn't give two flying Fs to, quite frankly, whatever the government would say.
Play into the government's narrative on something like this either. But most people are normies and don't like to pay as much attention to this sort of stuff that we do. And it is very, very dark that the United States government feels that instead of actually dealing with these problems and preventing them, all it wants to do, in the same way that our government does with Raiku and all of the other things that go on with the Home Office, they just want to manage the perception after the fact, after something has already happened. Either way, some of the other things that happened was that... his judge at the hearings initially put his bail at $1 million, and then that was reduced to $250,000 because there was a case made that, we're a working family, we need the money, we can't raise the money, despite the fact you only need to pay about 10% of the bail anyway. Despite the fact that they are not just a working family, they put up a GoFundMe, which was immediately flooded with people who were giving donations for the sake of the killer's family. Whether or not you think he's guilty of first-degree murder, Carmelo Anthony has already admitted that he killed him. The case comes down to whether it is in self-defense or not. Either way, large swaths of American society see a black kid murder or kill a white kid and decide they're the real victims because they're victims of systemic racism, white oppression, all of these other buzzwords, and say, we're going to financially support that. And loads of them left comments on this GoFundMe page that were pretty reprehensible, saying, you're fighting the good fight, Carmelo, show them what's what. We need to show these oppressors what's coming for them. Very South African, if I'm frank about it. Sadly.
Didn't they raise $500,000 for him?
Yes, and they continually changed the description of the fundraiser as well, because at first it heavily implied that this would be money going towards the bail funds, and then after they raised more money than they would need for the bail funds, it suddenly became about maintaining living standards for the family, because the father, Mr. Anthony, was going to have to take time off of work to be there with his kids, etc., etc. This all despite the fact that they were already living in a $900,000 gated community home.
Can I say something also real quick? If you could go, please, back to the previous link you were showing. The first line, that's the line of the account. Maybe that's not the exact way it was communicated, but it says this
That's not how it was communicated.
Yes,
I think we can all understand that that was the underlying reason.
But if that's the underlying reason and lots of stats and considerations were given in favor of that verdict, that means that this judge... you appeal to rhetoric that other people aren't allowed to appeal to.
Yes, and ironically enough as well, this Judge Angela Tucker, if you look into her, I believe her political affiliation's a GOP. She's a Republican as well, which meant that above party affiliation, there was a racial bias that went into this above principle.
But if you take back to that organisation, then it becomes a bit more interesting. If they're willing to ensure that the families shut up and that the families have to abide by the lines that they've created, what prevents them from having the similar discussions to judges or others to indicate that you would get preferment on your political and or judicial wrong of power if you just made sure that this was quietened down and calmed down in a different way? Just as there are those who argue that our judicial system has done so to Lucy Connolly, for example. No evidence for it, but when you have the dirty hand of secret government agencies behind it, anything's possible, is it not?
No, and certainly I've been reading a book recently which is very, very interesting, which is, what's it called? Generation 68. Now, the author is quite controversial, but the actual information within the book, I've been verifying all of it as I go along, and I will be using that information for projects in the future. It goes into quite a lot of detail about how the youth movements of the 1960s that erupted into all of this civil rights fervour back then, which this department of the government goes into, were initially seeded in the late 1940s, post-war, and the 1950s, primarily by the deep state, State Department and the CIA of America. And the reason for that seems to have been as a foreign policy outreach, so that countries that were going to be separated from European imperial policy would be more likely to align themselves with the US rather than the Soviets when they gained their independence, which the US was actively hoping for as well. So they were seeding money to student associations, to radical feminists. Gloria Steinem, she was paid by the CIA, and she was one of the first wave feminists.
We've done that for a long time.
Yeah,
I mean, MI6.
So there's the question of the 1960s, all of the civil rights movements and everything. How much of any of it was ever organic and not just cultural and regime change pushed by shadowy government organizations. So there's no doubt in my mind that they could easily influence judges as well. In this case, it might have been that. I don't see as much reason to believe that that might have been the case. I think that this was just a judge going easy on the kid.
Yeah, I'm probably right on that.
Harry, I've heard that the Civil Rights Act goes further than just arguing for equality of rights. I've heard that there are some other things that lots of people don't know, which could be seen as the progenitor of wokeness. Am I wrong?
Yes, there are arguments that can be made from that, from Christopher Caldwell's The Age of Entitlement book. But mainly a lot of that stuff, I think, God forbid that I infer his name, but Richard Hanania has a book on this called The Origins of Woke as well, which traces a lot of it back to legal practice that was started from the Civil Rights Act. Taken on its face, the actual text of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 doesn't have anything that's too disagreeable because it should apply equally to everybody. But interpretations from judges, extra departments, and executive orders that were passed mainly by the late 60s and late 70s paved the way for modern wokeness as a legal structure rather than just ideology.
We have this across the spectrum. The Race Relations Act was pretty fine in the UK when that was initiated. One can understand it. It was the amendments that have made the additional elements. The UN Refugee Convention, perfectly fine in its initial until it had the amendments, and then judicial activism and the extension. The extension are very much 70s to 80s kind of growth periods and all them. So, going on here, maybe that organisation has expanded and grown as well.
Yeah, I would love to go into more detail on this, but it's getting a bit off topic now. So carrying on, just to remind everybody as well, one of the people involved in this, a guy who decided to involve himself as the spokesperson for Carmelo Anthony, was Dominique Alexander. He showed up with this. And to remind everybody who Dominique Alexander is, let me see if they've got a picture of him here. He's this gentleman on the left. Here's a picture of Austin Metcalf, the murdered boy. So Minister Dominique Alexander was a Dallas-based defund the police activist and social justice leader. He'd been involved, he was the head of an organization called Next Generation Action Network, and there are some allegations that you can find online that seem to be backed up pretty well, that organization continually, subtly changes its name and reorganizes itself every single time tax returns need to be filed. So there seems to be possibly an element of a scam there. They were the ones involved in the defense and spokesperson. Alexander, it says here, his comments went viral across social media. People started to look back upon his criminal record because there was lots of documentation of local media reports of this guy's background. A Fox News digital review also exposed his longtime support for defunding the police and his ties to former Squad House Democrat and defund the police activist Cori Bush, who he was a big part in supporting at the time. So they say that in 2019, and I went over this at the time, but just a reminder of some of his greatest hits, there was an arrest warrant affidavit for Alexander, where his partner, Kyra Saunders, had reported to the police that he had shoved her and tried to strangle her. He had served 2 days in jail in 2021 after pleading guilty to a felony theft case. That was a case of a judge going incredibly easy on him for 2 days. In 2016, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison for repeatedly violating his probation. Of course, I don't believe he actually served much, if any, of that time. Another local report from 2009 details how he was arrested for allegedly causing serious head injuries to his then-girlfriend's 2-year-old son while babysitting. He initially told police that that the boy had fallen off of the couch while he was in the other room, but later admitted to shaking the child, and the judge charged him with a first-degree felony. Again, reports on how much time he may or may not have spent in prison for that.
As a perfectly decent guy you'd love to bring home to your family, wouldn't he?
Certainly the guy you would want representing you in a case where you're trying to present yourself as being innocent. Of course, he has always stated that what's actually been happening is that the evil white oppressor has been trying to keep him down, even in situations where he's admitted to wrongdoing, and that's what he's trying to do with Carmelo Anthony as well. So the developments that have gone on since then are that the Collin County District Attorney Greg Willis has announced that the grand jury has indicted Carmelo Anthony for first-degree murder in the Frisco track meet stabbing of Austin Metcalf. So the trial has not been scheduled yet, but that is what he will be tried against, first-degree murder. Also, some of the interesting stuff that's gone on, I wasn't aware of this at the time, but some publications like the Daily Mail and others were given access to footage that had been captured of the incident. And in the Daily Mail write-up, this post has just highlighted the most important stuff from it. They make the case that there was no confrontation that should be beneficial to a self-defense plea for Carmelo Anthony. So they describe Anthony is admitted to the stabbing but maintains he acted in self-defense, claiming the truth will come out. Initially, Frisco police said an altercation between the teens led to the violent encounter, and there were all sorts of rumors going around that they were going to the same school together, which was wrong, that they had known each other before, which was wrong. One of the big ones that was going around was that they were going to school together, knew each other, and that Austin Metcalf was a long-time bully of Carmelo Anthony. That was completely wrong. Complete strangers meeting for the very first time that day in this encounter, which ended up in murder.
Were there no witnesses there?
There were quite a few witnesses, which is where the affidavits and the police reports come from.
There would be.
And that's where you know that, I mean, his brother was there. Austin Metcalf's brother held him in his arms as he was dying. It's pretty horrifying. And the police reports as well are where we get the reports of, well, what happened was Carmelo Anthony came over, sat under there. People suspect, and I think this is probably right, although it can't be proved, it's just suspicions, that the reason that Carmelo Anthony had come under the tent in the first place was probably to steal from other people's backpacks while they weren't looking, but which is probably why he became so defensive when he was confronted by Austin Metcalf. But that's where we get the reports of when Austin approached him and confronted him, where we get Carmelo Anthony saying things like, come at me and see what happens, provoking the incident to escalate. But carrying on, the footage reviewed by the Daily Mail at the Frisco Independent School District's headquarters shows no obvious physical confrontation between the two prior to the stabbing. Daily Mail did not detect anything that indicated chaos was about to ensue. Strict guidelines were enforced for viewing the footage. Reporters were only permitted to take handwritten notes and were barred from capturing or republishing stills or clips. The district allowed limited release because the students' identities are not easily discernible in the video. Captured by a high-angle camera positioned near the press box and typically used for football broadcasts, the footage shows the tent at the top left of the screen. Students are sitting idly beneath it, waiting for competition to start. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, it becomes apparent that the moment has happened when an armed Anthony attacked Metcalf. The stabbing itself is not visible on camera, but the reaction is immediate. Students are seen fleeing from under the tent. While police later confirmed Anthony fled the scene, he cannot be clearly identified in the footage. So what they're saying there, the footage that you can see, as much as it doesn't show that much, it doesn't show any kind of major physical confrontation prior to the stabbing, which leads me to believe that this altercation was primarily, as would be suspected from the affidavits and the witness reports, verbal, until all of a sudden you're stabbed to death. Just saying, hey, this isn't your tent, go away please, bam, dead. It's as simple as that. And so Carmelo Anthony now, he's been on house arrest since he was released on bond in April 14th. If convicted, he could face a possible sentence of 5 to 99 years or life in prison. In the Texas criminal system, 17-year-olds are considered adults, which is why he's being charged. Anthony's attorney, Mike Howard, released a video statement after the indictment saying, in part, Carmelo and his family are confident in the justice system and the people of Collin County to be fair and impartial. Of course, Carmelo looks forward to his day in court because it's only in a trial that the full story can be heard and that impartial justice can be done. We expect that when the full story is heard, the prosecution will not be able to rule out the reasonable doubt that Carmelo Anthony may have acted in self-defense. So we're using a lot of hedge words there. Reasonable doubt that he may. I understand that he is.
Yeah, but I don't think you can really use a knife for self-defense.
Well, certainly in a situation
not unless someone
like
else
this,
has got another knife or a gun being pointed at you.
Yeah, all of the witness reports, even if it was going to turn into a physical confrontation, it does sound like A, he was provoking a physical confrontation, and B, he already had the knife with him in his backpack, which raises the question, why did he bring that to school in the first place? I understand in America people are allowed to carry weapons, but I'm pretty certain, I've read people reporting that even in schools, you're not supposed to bring knives into school the same way you're not supposed to bring guns into school.
We do that in London now, and probably have it in Manchester and Nottingham and other towns as well. We're not.
Yeah. I think the self-defense case is a stretch, but I understand that they've been hired to defend him, so that's what they've got to do. The next step in the process will be assigning a trial judge who will set a first appearance court date. That first appearance could be days, weeks, or months down the road, so we'll see what happens. They also, in this on CBS News, say that they looked at the surveillance footage, and they basically confirm what the Daily Mail said. About 9:55, a sudden movement is seen under the tent, followed by interaction between two figures. Frisco ISD officials said that this is the moment the stabbing occurred. Several people can be seen walking or running away while others approached the area. Once the arresting officer, who got Anthony, said, "I have the alleged suspect in custody," Anthony reportedly told the officer, "I'm not alleged, I did it." Anthony then said that Metcalf put his hands on him after he asked him not to, according to his affidavit, but all of the other witness reports say that he was provoking and trying to get a rise, escalate the encounter.
I have a legal question that maybe, Stephen, you are the person to answer it. But in a case like that, wouldn't the defense be almost entirely certain, centered around the notion of self-defense and also mitigating factors that could be morally exculpatory, allegedly?
Well, I think
from the side of the defense.
If you're looking at them from the side of the defense, the first thing they would do is try to ensure that it wasn't you that was seen to be the person who actually committed the crime. But in this case, there's too many witnesses. The self-views,
he's admitted it
and
himself.
he's admitted it. So then they have very limited opportunities there to kind of mitigate what they've done, other than say it's self-defense. So that would be the first thing that we do, and then what you would go on then is try and find out evidence to try and suggest that he was attacked. The big difficulties, and shifting now to the prosecutory side, is that the chap has a knife. Self-defense is permissible if you're being attacked, but the question is then, can you use a knife to stab someone? When we look at cases here, when we had the farmer who shot two burglars in the house, was it possible to shoot them when they were coming into the house? So the question of being able to use a physical weapon like a gun or a knife is not always a very clear-cut case of saying it's self-defense. There has to be something much stronger to suggest that you can use that. The other aspects they'll be looking at is whether it's negligence, so that they can turn around and say, look, this is manslaughter. What we're trying to look at is manslaughter. There was no intention to kill. So murder is, in terms of the UK, malice aforethought, is about the intention that you're going to either recklessly or intentionally kill someone. I think what they'll go here is try and say that this is a fight that's occurred. It was self-defense. Unfortunately, he has a knife. Therefore, it's not murder one in American terms, but it'll go down to the equivalent of what is manslaughter in the UK. So he reacted badly. It wasn't with the intention to kill him. It was a reaction. And that's what I think the secondary element will be, and all the evidence around it will be to try and work that. The question for the prosecution is how to show that maybe by having the knife, maybe by the way that he created the fight or the kind of interaction, that he intended to harm there and then. So it's up to you, the jury, to decide whether he intended to kill that person then, or whether it was negligence, and therefore, or in this case, a self-defense that led to manslaughter, but the self-defense claim fails.
I mean, personally, given the evidence that we currently have access to, obviously the prosecution has taken about 2.5 months at this point to gather as much evidence as they can. But the evidence that we, as the public, have access to, it looks like it'll be a very, very difficult case for the defence to make from where I'm sitting, because all of the evidence, in my opinion, points to the idea that Carmelo Anthony, whatever his intentions were going under that tent, provoked a situation where he knew he had a weapon and then stabbed Austin Metcalf completely out of proportion with any threat that he may have felt, which again was brought on himself by the fact that he was provoking it. So as far as I'm concerned, morally speaking, Carmelo Anthony is clearly and obviously guilty and has unnecessarily murdered a promising young man.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.